Welcome to the Action Network podcast. I'm Mike Calabrese, and today I'm joined by our golf expert, Spencer Aguiar, for the FedEx playoffs, which move forward, one tournament down, two to go. Today, we're going to dive into this weekend's BMW Championship being played at Bellerive Country Club in Town and Country, Missouri, which is located in the western suburbs of St. Louis. 50 players will be duking it out on this Robert Trent Jones designed course. And the headline is over 70 sand traps litter this track. It's a par 70, almost 7,500 yards. And when the wind is howling, this thing is a beast. But there's not going to be much wind this week, and it's going to be real hot. So there's going to be ideal scoring conditions for this group. There's also no 36-hole cut. The top 30 golfers will advance to the final leg of the FedEx Cup playoffs next week in Atlanta, Georgia. Limited data to pull from here, Spencer. A smaller field, and as I mentioned, no cut. Where do you start with game planning how to attack this event?
I did look back a little bit at the 2018 PGA Championship when it was held here. I mean, it's probably better than the stuff that you would find in 2008, which would be the time before that it took place at Bellerive. You talked about it at the beginning. Robert Trent Jones, 1960, designs this course. You get the significant renovation by his son, Reese Jones, in 2005, 2006. And it is this extremely long par 70 venue. When I tried to handicap what this looked like, and you talked about the heat, we talked about that last week on the show, and it was something that I weighed in my model, and I did it once again this week for anybody who has access, and I'm sure we'll talk about some of those stats throughout the show. But this course is going to feature very similar zoysia grass on the fairways. One of the things I mentioned last week for anybody who tuned into that episode is zoysia grass has this propensity to sit a ball up. So it's very advantageous to find the short grass off the tee. When you miss this week, it's going to be this very fine fescue rough when you go wayward, and larger misses are more significant than small misses. You get water that can come into play. You can get some really funky lies. Large bent grass greens, that's one of the differences that we get this week versus last. Really large green complexes in general, 8,200 square feet. And I think all of that kind of just adds to the difficulty that we're talking about. You got to find the short grass off the tee. When you're approaching in, if you're not doing it from the fairway, it's going to be really difficult to stop. This place is probably going to be baked out because of the heat. And we've kind of seen that historically. And, around the green, acumen's going to come into play. There are deep bunkers that are going to require long shots around the green that you kind of have to traverse yourself through. So I think if you're not dialed in and you are errant with certain parts of your game, there is a big number out there to be found. And if we do circle this back to 2018 for the PGA Championship, winning score right in that mid 15, 16 under par range of what we saw, I would kind of consider we're going to be right into that territory again. Don't think it's going to be some abnormal outcome this week. You talked about there's no win, so maybe we get a shot or two easier, but it's these long courses. And one of the ways that I looked at it in my model is I do think off the tee with all aspects of the game are important. A lot of people are going to talk about the distance component of it when you have a nearly 7,450 yard course, but I think it's equally important to be able to find the fairway here. So total driving was a really big stat for me. That was about 20% of my weighted strokes gained. And then, whatever we talk about with approach, if you are in the fairway approaching, it's a pretty easy approach course. And we have seen players historically be able to separate specifically from this 200 plus yard distance. So long iron plays are going to be a must if you want to find success at Bellerive this week.
We talked about it a little bit last week in terms of the weather and its impact on the athletes themselves. And this is clearly not the 1980s where people are smoking darts in the parking lot and, at best, maybe slamming a Diet Coke as an energy drink or something like that. These guys treat their bodies like any other professional athlete to a certain degree. They consider that. Is that something that ever creeps into your model? You look at body type or, potentially some players lagging a little bit, maybe in their distance or their consistency in certain weather conditions. Not necessarily always oppressive heat, although it's going to top out in the high 80s. I think the heat index may cross over 90. It's not necessarily something they haven't handled before, but do you ever pepper that in to some of your expectations?
I don't reweigh anything based off of body type or physical outlook. I kind of let the stats do the talking for themselves. Whether I look at a really undulated course or I look at extreme heat conditions, I kind of try to let the stats tell me that this is a player who his baseline statistics are higher than what we expect this week. And, if you start diving into it, and if there are physicality limitations, if we want to call it that certain players end up presenting on the course, it's certainly something to keep into mind, but it's mostly done from a data-driven perspective. So if the stats tell me that to be the case, you can dive deeper into it from there. But I'm not necessarily, and I'll leave people nameless right now. We don't need to weight shame on this show. But if we point to somebody and say that doesn't look like somebody who can handle the heat, if the stats tell me that, then dive a little bit deeper into that.
All right, let's get into some of your head-to-heads that you like. Let's start with Colin Morikawa, minus 111 over Justin Thomas. Lots to like about Morikawa, to be frank. I mean, he's ninth in the FedEx Cup points entering this week, so he's comfortably inside the top 30, and you can argue no forced urgency, gets to play loose. He ranks second on tour in strokes gained on approach this season, and fourth in strokes gained total over his last 5 starts. Third place finish at the Travelers Golf off a bogey-free final round. 61 is recent evidence that his game is trending up. JT, on the other end, he's got to press. I mean, he's 44th here, so he has to make up ground. Wasn't a great year, at least by his lofty standards. Any other element of his game or Morikawa's that you'd like to highlight before getting into the pricing?
I do think it's an interesting outlook that you just talked about. I know we've talked a lot about players and what they need during this FedEx Cup run. Take somebody like Koiven last week who really needed to put pedal to the metal and try to get himself here, and he wasn't able to do it. And we're going to see the same thing from Justin Thomas, which isn't necessarily a negative for him. I kind of made this argument last week that if a player just was able to turn the switch on at any given time, they probably would have done it before the last week before the Tour Championship comes into play. But, when you look at Thomas here, he was the sharpest player on boards last week, whether that be for DFS or it be an outright and matchup markets. And you got a very disappointing result from him. He ends up landing 47th on the leaderboard, just really never gets anything going. And I kind of felt like the market, when you mix it in with what we got with Morikawa coming 52nd, that you didn't really get this disparity difference from, I thought last week's course, well, I didn't necessarily have Justin Thomas with a lot of exposure to him. Like, for reference sake in this, he was 19th in my model out of 69 players. You take it this week, he's 37th in my model out of 50 players. So it's not to say that Colin Morikawa doesn't see some sort of a decrease himself from, just the generic course fit that you're going to be talking about and as we're going to discuss this week. But I think for me, one of the things that I noticed with Thomas specifically, we always think of him as this pristine iron player. Like, at his very best, he was able to gain strokes at an astronomical rate compared to the field. Some of the short iron stuff still looks good on paper. He's inside of the top 15 of my model from within 125 yards, but it just gets progressively worse as you start moving it down the board. And, one of the worst areas it's going to be is from 175 plus, whether that be from just 175 to 200, or you want to push it even further out to 200 plus. Out of a 50-man field, he's outside of the top 40 in those areas. Short game looks really good. That's always something that he can, kind of call on at any given point. Has some spike potential with the putter. So I think that there's upside here. And I certainly don't want to sit here and say that if we look on Saturday and Justin Thomas is inside the top 10 of the leaderboard, this was some unknown, unseen possibility that could come into the mix. But I'm going to kind of just bet on a profile here with Morikawa, where I understand last week was not what we wanted to see from him. Willing to kind of just throw that out, move forward here in a matchup where I don't think Thomas has seen the shift down that he should have. And, markets have stayed very, I don't want to say aggressive with him, but you can see the specific matchups that he's paired against this week, whether it be Cantlay or Morikawa. Like, he has stayed in this range and is consistently holding his own. So I thought this minus 111 price was the best value that I had on the board. Very similar thought process in some ways to what I talked about last week with JJ Spawn over Minwoo Lee. And we saw Minwoo Lee get off to that really fast start on Thursday, which I kind of talked about being a possibility. And then it was 3 days of let's just move in reverse. And Spawn didn't look particularly good, but good enough to win that bet. And I'm kind of hoping that this is what ends up transpiring on this play again.
You've heard me say it before, we've got market movers here on this podcast, and you want to get their bets and analysis right away. The only way to do that is by signing up for Action Pro. You'll get instant notifications when action experts track their bets, plus access to all of our pro projections across whatever sport you're watching this summer: PGA, Major League Baseball, the WNBA, and now college football and the NFL season is right around the corner, so it's a great time to jump in. Get $20 off an annual subscription with the promo code POD20. That's promo code POD20 for $20 off a year of Action Pro right now. Go to actionnetwork.com/pro to get in on this offer so you can become the smartest bettor you can be. Are you bringing two to the table here for your outrights, both priced at 20-1, Ludwig Oberg and Xander Schauffele? Let's start with Oberg. He just finished tied for 7th in Memphis. He gained ground late with a 67 on Sunday. He's also had 3 top 5s and 3 straight starts at one point in the spring. Carries in the second best strokes gained total average on tour as of mid-June. So when you start to look at it, the course profile also lines up well with Oberg's game. He's primarily a premier off the tee to green kind of player. And Bellerive's, as I mentioned, 7,500 yards. You got the thick rough. There's only 2 par 5s. The setup seems to reward what he brings to the table in terms of his game. The looming question, though, and the reason why he's priced outside of some of the more elite golfers here and at 20-1, I think there's decent value. It's because of his putter. Can it get hot, or at the very least, can it not betray him in critical moments? That's the question mark. Is there anything else that you want to add to Ludwig's game that's kind of been a familiar script? There's a bit of, I would say, the perception has kind of solidified around his game. We know what we're getting. In a lot of cases, people would prefer placement wagers on him, but you're going for the big swing here at 20-1. Why is now the right time?
I mean, first of all, I think placement wagers are a fine way to go also. I mean, if you just tuned into the show for an entire year and only took placement wagers on Tommy Fleetwood and Siwoo Kim, you would be doing exponentially better. It's almost an every week thing that we see come into play. And Oberg has kind of been that third name to the mix that I've been sprinkling in on a lot of these cards. So if you want to bet him as a top 10, I'm not going to talk anybody against that. I think for me, I want to temper expectations before I talk about all the positives. Like it's not, I would call it a negative to watch him make a move on Sunday, because this has turned into the classic Oberg script that when he's in contention on Sunday, we move backwards. When we're out of contention on Sunday, we move up. We get this, high-end finish, at least on results of what we're looking at. And we never really competed to win that golf tournament any single time in the middle of the week that we got ourselves back into contention. It feels like we moved in reverse. And there's always 1 or 2 shots or 1 or 2 holes where that short game ends up plaguing him. And that's what I don't want to see. We're going to have to see more positivity in some of these areas and avoid the big mistakes. But a positive mover in my model on bent grass surfaces compared to his baseline. So I think that's at least a positive to look at, that we can point towards, that there is an ability for him to spike with the putter a little bit more than we have seen at times. And that's going to continue onto large green complexes. I talked about these being over 8,000 square feet on average. He jumps into a top 20 putter in this field. And those are not necessarily marks that are going to sound super high end in just a 50-man field. But really what I'm banking on is that off the tee game that you talked about, where he's going to rank inside the top 5 for me. And then this long iron proximity that he brings into the mix. He's the number 2 player for me in my model over a 2-year perspective with proximity from 200 plus yards. And that includes an area where if we want to talk about mistakes and maybe potentially avoiding mistakes, he's a top 6 fescue rough player when he does miss the fairway. And I am hoping that that ability for him to scramble out of those sort of lies might present a higher ability for him to work himself up the leaderboard. And, I question what to do this week, Michael. Like, Scotty Scheffler just won going away. I land on a Siwoo Kim ticket that's not even close. It had no chance to ever actually get to the finish line. We win by more than a touchdown. And now we're coming back to a tournament where he's number 1 across the board in every single statistical metric. So, I think that I'm not a person that's ever going to play the without Scotty market. I just don't think it makes mathematical sense. This was the first week that I actually looked at it and I tried to figure out if there was a way to do it. I just didn't like the pricing at the end of the day, but Oberg has the potential and the skill set to find success at a course like this. Whether he does and whether he gets past Scotty is a different question that we will see if he can answer. But I really liked Oberg's upside. I thought he was a top 4 win equity player on the board. And that perception that he doesn't win kind of continues to push him into these ranges. That's just a little bit higher than he should be.
I mean, we talked about it really for weeks, the tongue-in-cheek, what's wrong with Scotty? And then you look at the last 3, tied 4th, second place finish, and he wins at the St. Jude Championship going away. Is it that quick, a bit of a whipsaw, go from there's poking some holes in his game, where's his motivation, what's going on between the ears, to now all of a sudden he's the Terminator again, we all have to get out of his way?
Potentially. I mean, I never thought he was that far away. Take a couple rounds, like even at the Masters in the US Open, made the late push at the Masters, couldn't quite get there over Rory. And you look at the US Open, which is where I came on the show and said, I think we are approaching a win. And I ended up being 4 or 5 tournaments too early on this. And when Scotty's 3 to 5 to 1 every single week, I wasn't going to sit there and play that game over and over and over again. It was just kind of trying to fit and pick my spots, which could make an argument that last week, maybe that was the mistake I made on this show, was not going to him when he had drifted into that 5.5 to 1 range. But probably should have won the Travelers. I mean, he had every opportunity to there. It's a bunch of second place finishes. Look at the 3M Open. Then he wins. Like, it wouldn't be outlandish to think that he just sweeps the FedEx Cup playoffs and takes all 3 of these. So it's a real concern. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I feel super comfortable. I have the same amount of exposure that I would on a normal board. And one of the reasons for that is I thought hold percentages in the market, we had about 10% less hold just across the board than we normally get. So like books allowed us to be able to take some shots. And that's including a Scotty number that's like 3.5 to 1. So, if we think that price is fair and the market didn't necessarily substantially drift in a lot of spots, there's probably value in a couple of these players in a specific range. And my mall ended up landing on it with Oberg and Xander, who's going to be my next pick here in a second. But yeah, like the concern is real that Scotty just goes Terminator mode. Like I wrote an article for my website, and he is legitimately the Terminator running down the fairway, just absolute destruction with everything in the path, and the fans and the pins and just everything's just going up into smoke because of him. And there's a possibility of that, and maybe the outrights end up proving that. But gonna take my chances where I can.
What's interesting, Oberg 20 to 1, Xander also 21. They both tied for 7th in Memphis last week. We know what the ceiling for Xander is. Obviously, he's a 2-time major winner. He did backslide in terms of his short game earlier this summer. He's rebounded a bit since, but there's still cause for concern. The bottom line, at least when you look at the numbers, is that his form is far more scattered than Oberg's. So why is this the right number? I would think, given the way that he's played this year, maybe a little bit longer, maybe simply a placement wager. And as you've brought up multiple times, and when Kyle's on the show as well, there's no reason why you can't mix and match and have, a top 30, a top 20, an outright winner, something, in terms of a variety grab bag for one golfer. That being said, I'm a little bit surprised to see you come to the table with these 2 particular golfers with the statistical profiles that they bring at the same price.
So a lot of it for me stemmed from specific areas that I saw an improvement. So like Xander, I talked about the Oberg numbers of where I saw the improvement with the putter. Xander has similar improvement on around the green on comp courses. And the other area that we see this pretty significant uptick is from the approach. And I think the main reason for that is he's a pristine golfer with that acumen that he possesses from 175 plus yards. One of the best players every single year from that range. And, I think some of the statistical profile from him got a little bit skewed, like just in general that you were talking about. Wasn't the best Xander year that you would expect from him, but even still based off of that, you're seeing this improvement. He jumps into a top 10 expected approach player for me on this specific course, which is 20th over a 2-year running model that's not geared towards this venue. And then if you want to look at just the last 24 rounds, very similar to that, 25th overall. The around the green that I talked about, 30th overall from a 2-year running total. You look just for this course, and I mean, that's going to include around the green that has difficult rough, around the green with a lot of bunkers, around the green with some of that fescue rough. It's kind of just trying to find corollary and comp trends that you're going to be seeing here. jumps from 30th to 16th. Putter does move in the wrong direction in a lot of areas, and I think that's one of the concerns, but like this is not a course historically where the putter is super predictive on what we see from year to year. That's kind of an answer that Kyle and I give. It feels like every single episode that we're trying to find specific game types that are just not going to go so in reverse with the flat stick that all of a sudden you can't find the upside. And, maybe that's the problem I've had on some of these outrights in the past, is that the ball striking, not to always mention Siwoo Kim on every single episode, but look at Siwoo Kim last week. He leads the tournament through 3 days with his ball striking. He cannot make a putt. And we're in this spot that we can't eclipse what Scotty ends up doing. And I think for Xander, the big difference is we know that at any given stretch of time, he can get hot with the putter. He's not a golfer that is bottom of the barrel that never seems to make putts. When he makes them in bunches. And to win a golf tournament, and specifically here to beat Scotty Scheffler, you're going to have to find somebody whose ball striking potential is very high that can match Scotty. You're going to honestly need Scotty to miss putts. We've seen what happens when Scotty makes putts. He's unbeatable in a lot of these contests. But my hope here is, Xander can hold his own with the ball striking. Scotty misses putts, and we see Xander get hot with his short game and maybe steal a couple shots here and there. And all of a sudden you're looking at a leaderboard come Sunday to where, Xander's at 13 or 14 under with a real chance to win this tournament. And at least that's my hope with it. We've seen it at least the last couple of weeks. I know he backdoored that top 10 at the St. Jude, which is the Oberg special that I was just talking about. And Xander's been the king of that historically. Even that Rocket Classic where he came second. I ended up having Thorbjornsen in that tournament. And I added him to my card very last minute, right before we ended up teeing off. I don't really think Xander was all that in the mix of it. I know it got close there for a second, and then Thorbjornsen ended up pulling ahead. Did his part though. Definitely didn't go in reverse there. But I just think we're trending at the right time. And I'm going to throw this out there for anybody who does have the potential to bet a week early. Like, the Tour Championship has historically been the Rory and Xander test, where they seem to go and just find success over and over and over again. Rory's on the wrong part of his game. Like, Rory played 14 tournaments when it's all said and done this year and doesn't seem to be entering the mix with much form. I don't know what's going to happen this week. I think some of his driving is probably a little bit better fit than we saw during last week's event. I would assume he's going to provide a better result. I'm still not touching him in any market, but Xander here is starting to trend towards something. So I would not be shocked, depending on what price we end up getting, that I don't end up coming on the show again next week and potentially recommending Xander once again, because I think one of these next two might be the two best opportunities that he's had all year.
Early in the show, we mentioned not body shaming, and Siwoo Kim, who had 5 top 3 finishes this year, so close, but no cigar time and time again. He's basically my size. He's about 7 pounds lighter. I'll just give him a piece of advice. I like a nice hot dog, white onion, yellow mustard, a transfusion at the turn. What is your go-to when you're playing? I also throw in a bag of Fritos. I like Fritos as well. My body's a temple. What do you like at the turn to close out this episode, Spencer?
I'm not in the kind of shape that I used to be. Like, I don't weigh much for anybody who sees me, but like, I'm definitely not as fit as I used to be. If I get out there, I usually just like pre-pack a sandwich of some kind, peanut butter and jelly. Not the best meal to necessarily say, like, it's not the spicy one where there's a big conversation, but I'll usually throw that in the bag. I'll put a protein shake of some kind, and that's usually the two things that you'll see from me if I'm on the golf course.
That'll do it for today's episode. Thanks for joining us here on the Action Network podcast. Be sure to check out actionnetwork.com and the Action app for all of our great golf betting and DFS content. And even better, sign up for Action Pro. Go to actionnetwork.com/pro to take advantage of our new offer, Pod20, for $20 off an annual subscription. You can find Spencer on X at Toff Sports, and he's on the same handle on our free award-winning Action Network app. For Spencer Aguiar, I'm Mike Calabrese. Best of luck betting this weekend, and we'll see you here for the conclusion of the FedEx Cup playoffs next week in Atlanta, Georgia.